It's an honor for me to introduce our speaker today. He's been the rock of this community for many, many years and still is behind the scenes. So I want you all to know that. And he doesn't speak to us very often, but he's here today to lay some pearls on us. And it's Chris Garey, licensed unity teacher.
Okay, we got some props here we need to get lined up. And we have to have it so that the camera can see it, and some of you people may not be able to see it real well, but you've got an insert in your bulletin. And those online have getting a little bit of ringing here, Larry. Those online, the email that you had the link for this meeting, there's also a link in there where you can download this chart. So the theme, as John mentioned, the theme for this month is New Thought History. And so I want to talk about the origins of all of the thoughts that we use now in New Thought. And so New Thought is primarily comprised of Christian Science, Unity, Divine Science, Church of Religious Science, which is now Centers for Creative Living, and Unitarians. That makes up the New Thought grouping. And so as I'm going through, I want you to sort of keep an eye on the idea that this is going to come through, that this is a blend of Eastern and Western ideas that are coming together. And as John pointed out, Toltec and some others that also fit in there with the Four Agreements and other things that develop and weave the fabric of the New Thought movement. I also want to have you notice that women were very prominent in the development of the New Thought, and also the things that spurred the New Thought movement to happen were the need for healing, because back in those days the medical profession was not real strong, and so people had to heal themselves, and so healing was an important part. And then as I go along and try to relate some of these ancient ideas to our unity principles. Okay, so let's talk about what the definition of New Thought. New Thought ministries generally share a core belief in the universal presence of a creative energy or God within the world and within all people. And the central teaching is that thought evolves and unfolds, and our thinking creates our experience of the world. Great emphasis on positive thinking, affirmations, meditation, and prayer. And they generally have been influenced by a wide range of ideas. So that's what we're going to talk about today, that wide range of ideas. Because there isn't really any new spiritual teachings. It's just those ideas that are transformed and put into a format that we can understand and relate to in our present day. So I want to quote Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity. He says that the truth that we teach is not new, neither do we claim special revelations or discovery of new religious principles. Our purpose is to help and teach humankind to use and prove the eternal truths. So that's what we're all about, incorporating these into our lives. So, Larry, we're going to go to the chart for a moment, and we're going to talk about Plato, Swedenborg, Raphael Emerson, Thomas Troward, and Helena Blavatsky. So that we're done with the chart now. So let's start with Plato. He was a Greek philosopher, 400 BC. He wrote an important book called The Republic, where he talked about his theory of forms, which basically was that there's the material world, and then but it's based on thoughts in the eternal world of forms, which is what he called it. But now, of course, today we call it the material world and the spiritual world. So back then, that idea first started, and of course that was an important underpinning of Christianity. And Emanuel Swedenborg lived in the 1600s. His teachings emphasized the dependence of physical health on the inner level of spiritual well-being. And he taught that God is a transcendent, all-powerful force, also immanent in humankind and men and women. And men and women are the receptacles of divine energy. Sound familiar? So that's really, and their very life principle is the indwelling presence of God. So that's our unity principle 1 and 2, isn't it? That God is everywhere and God is within us. So Ralph Waldo Emerson was an important part. He studied German transcendentalism, and he also studied Plato, and he was greatly influenced by the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, which is hard to pronounce. So he started the transcendentalism movement in North America, which led directly to the Unitarian Church. So the transcendentalism advocates that there is an ideal spiritual state that transcends the physical and is only realized through a knowledgeable, intuitive awareness. So they're talking about going to that power within, which is, of course, principles 1 and 2, and 4, which is prayer and meditation to go within. Helena Blavatsky was a Russian in the 1800s, and she was the first to take Eastern religions and put them in a format that the Western mind could grasp. And she's studied Eastern religion and Swedenborgism and Mesmerism, which we'll talk about in a moment. And she developed a philosophy called Theosophy. And we have Theosophists here in 5 cities. The temple at Halcyon, they are Theosophists. And if you went in there, you'd see a picture of Helena Blavatsky up on the wall. And their theory, their philosophy, is that God is an ever unknowing principle beyond the range of human understanding. God is everywhere in every atom of the universe and immanent in humankind. And men and women have within themselves and potential only goodness, perfection, and divine attributes. Humanity possesses the free choice, and disharmony in the human behavior are results of faulty choices. So, of course, that again ties in with our unity principle number 1 and number 5, that we have to make choices and live these teachings. They also talk about prayer consists of ardently bending the soul towards the divine. I really love that, bending the soul towards the divine. And of course, that's talking about our unity principle number 4, prayer and meditation are our connection to spirit. So Thomas Troward, he lived in the mid-1800s. He was born of English parents, but he was born in India. So his childhood was in India. When he got old enough to go to school, he went to school in England and became a lawyer and returned to India and practiced law and also became a judge for many years. But he was exposed and influenced by the Hindu religion. And he wrote a book called, just went out of my head. It's on here. Mental Science. And he was a great influence of Ernest Holmes. And Ernest Holmes wrote a book, Science of Mind, very similar. Okay, so we're going to go back to the chart for a moment and go over on the other side and talk about Zoroastrianism, Jesus, Phineas Quimby, Franz Mesmer, and Mary Baker Eddy. Okay, done with the chart again. Zoroastrianism started 1500 BC, and they were one of the first religions that had just one god. Before that, there was, a moon god and the sun god, etc., etc. One god, and they had a threefold path. And their motto was good deeds, good thoughts, good words. Sound familiar? That's our positive thinking, power of positive thinking. Who knew that it started in 1500 BC? Very interesting. Franz Mesmer, he developed mesmerism, which we talk about today as hypnotism. And Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, felt that mesmerism was the first scientific proof of mind over matter, mind over the body. So that was an important development. Phineas Quimby, who many said is the father of New Thought in North America, he fell ill from tuberculosis and was very ill. And a friend of his said, if you ride a horse out in nature, you'll be cured of tuberculosis. Well, he was so weak he couldn't do that, but he was able to ride in a carriage, and he recovered. So he was a scientist and a clockmaker and inventor. So he liked to know how things worked, and he was intrigued. Why did just a horse ride allow him to recover from tuberculosis? So he started to study mesmerism and started studying about the placebo effect, and he developed a healing process that worked with the patient to calmly explain the mental causes of the malady and replace that fear with confidence, with faith, with conviction, and firm expectation that they would be healed. And they were healed. So he felt that he was healing the same way that Jesus did when Jesus said, thy faith hath made thee whole. So if you have faith, you will heal. So he practiced that for many years and healed a lot of people. And one of them was Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science. So she took his techniques, put it and turned it into a teaching. And so Christian Science, they study her teachings and the Bible. That's it. They're restricted to that, basically. And one of her students was Emma Curtis Hopkins. And Emma Curtis Hopkins was a natural teacher, so much so that she was given a college professor position at 15 years old. It was amazing. And so she broke away from Emma Curtis from Mary Baker Eddy and the Christian Science and started her own institute, which she called the Emma Hopkins College of Metaphysical Science, which was very, very successful. And we'll go back to the chart for a moment to see right in the middle here is Emma Curtis Hopkins. She's called the teacher of teachers because you can see that she's taught Emily Cady, Myrtle Fillmore, Charles Fillmore, Nora Brooks, Linda Kramer, Ernest Holmes, all important people in the movement. And interestingly enough, you all know the story of Myrtle Fillmore, who had tuberculosis, and she and Charles went to a lecture of E.B. Weeks, and she got the affirmation, "You are a child of God, and therefore do not inherit illness." Well, E.B. Weeks was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins. Okay, Emily Cady. She wrote a pamphlet called Finding the Christ in Ourselves. And Charles and Myrtle, which, that's right up our alley, isn't it? Charles and Myrtle Fillmore read that and was so enamored with it, they got with her and asked her to write a book. So she wrote the book Lessons in Truth, which is a textbook that we still use today in Unity. And I've taught several classes from that. So, of course, we know Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity. And again, this theme of healing from Phineas Quimby, Mary Baker Eddy, Myrtle Fillmore, all were spurred by healing. Same thing with Melinda Kramer. She was ill, and she was so ill, she's just cried out in anguish, is there a way out of my condition? Is there a power in the universe that can heal me? And she got intuitive instructions on how to do that, and she was healed. And Nora Brooks had a relative that was ill, and she recommended that this ill person go and work with Emma Curtis Hopkins, and was healed. So Nora and Melinda Kramer got together, and they co-founded Divine Science. And then there's Ernest Holmes, who my page is out of order here. Looks like. I'll just have to go by memory. He spent a lot of time in nature and was asking questions, who am I? Why am I here? Who is God? So he started studying Emerson and Emma Curtis Hopkins and Phineas Quimby and all of those. So he developed the teaching of science of mind. So what are some of the more modern, recent influences? Well, we've got some recent Unity authors like Eric Butterworth, who Rita's teaching a class right now for one of his books, Robert Brumrut, Mary Allison Richard Jaffola, Jim Rosemary, and we just did a class on one of his books earlier this year. And then we have the channeled works, Course in Miracles, Conversations in God, Emmanuel, Way of Mastery, Course of Love. All of those are fitting into this tapestry. And then we have the Christian influences of Catherine Ponder, Wayne Dyer, Carolyn Mace, Louise Hay, Michael Singer, Byron Katie, and of course Louise Hay wrote her title of her book, important book, was You Can Heal Yourself. So that's a good example of she's taking all of these ancient wisdoms and putting them into a book and a workbook that we could deal with and work with in our culture in these times. And then we have the Eastern influence. We have speakers all the time quoting Rumi and Hafez. Then we have Alan Watts, Buddhism, Ram Dass, Hindu, Eckhart Tolle, which I would say is sort of a mix between Buddhism and Taoism, Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhism, Pema Chodron, Buddhism, Yogananda, Hindu, Louis, is it Don Luis Miguel? Yeah. Five Agreements, that's Toltec. All of that fits into the tapestry. So it's really these ancient thoughts and philosophies blending and being woven into this current fabric of new thought. which I think is fascinating. And it's all connected around the mind, body, and spirit, and applying these principles to our lives to make them better. And that's how our ministry does that, with the spiritual talks and classes to develop our spirituality. And we have the Aging Gracefully classes to work on the mind and the body. We've got our support groups, the men's groups, the women's groups, Power of 8, meditation group, Aging Gracefully support groups. All of those help us grow together. And of course, we've got the fun groups like the choir and the ukuleles. All of those help us live our truth. So in conclusion, you can see how the Eastern and Western traditions are coming together, and they're a blend of ancient and modern thoughts. It's all about healing ourselves, mind and body. And you can see how the women play an important role, starting with Mary Baker Eddy and Helena Blavatsky. So the New Thought movement is continuing to evolve, and our congregation is part of that evolvement, so we can be proud of that. So, I always like to close with an affirmation, and this affirmation just came to me last night. This may mean different things to different people, but the affirmation is, I am part of something bigger. Let's say that together. I am part of something bigger. Let's say that one more time with zeal. I am part of something bigger. All right, thank you.